Welcome, leaders. I hope you're doing well. We want to thank you for joining the Innovative Leader Podcast. I am David Phillips, leadership consultant, and I'm here with Christy Geiger, executive leadership coach. And we're passionate about leaders and transforming the way we lead. And so we like to talk each week about different things to equip, inspire, and transform how we lead in life and work. And so today we're going to talk about some skills to build in the context of the rise of the internet and Industry 4.0. Kind of merge all of these ideas together. So this is a platform for you to share too. So if you have any questions or ideas or comments, please make sure you share those. And follow on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So we'd love to hear back from you there. And then also our podcast host allows us to take messages. And so there's links on our website to be able to do that as well. So we'd love to hear from you. So today we're going to talk about this idea of dynamic decision making in the context of the rise of the internet and the rise of leadership 4.0, Industry 4.0. And so, Christy, let's kind of start there. Let's talk a little bit about what dynamic decision making is, and just kind of get a brief overview there. And then we'll talk about why we need that skill or what it is, and then why it's different in the past. And we'll talk about how to develop that a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about what it is.
Sure. So a lot of times, it's great. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So dynamic decision making. It's interesting because as leaders, we are constantly making decisions. So on one hand, it doesn't really seem like a new skill. However, there's two things. Number one, most leaders can improve their ability and their skill in decision making, because the faster you can make decisions and the more confident you are with your decisions, the better you're able to lead, people are able to follow, and things move forward. But really the key word here for Leadership 4.0 is dynamic. And to me, I just love this year, 2020 has been such an interesting opportunity of changes and the unexpected and uncertainty. And like we've talked about in the past, a lot of times we can look back to 2020 with disdain and can't wait for it to be over, yada, yada, yada. But really what COVID has accelerated these skills that we have to develop anyway because of Industry 4.0. So as a 4.0 leader, the ability to make dynamic decisions becomes critical. And if you just try on your experience in COVID. So as a leader, COVID happened. What were you doing? Well, do we close? Do we stay open? Are we a, what is it called? Help me out. Essential business.
Right.
Or if our city isn't allowing us to be an essential business, do we appeal against that? Who works from home? Do we let them take all their computers home, or how do they work from home?
Right.
What allowances do we provide? Tons of decisions floated in at the beginning of COVID and our workforce and what we do. Or maybe you work for a restaurant or a grocery store or whatever. It does not matter what industry you're in. There were decisions to be made, and we had to make them quickly. And then also there were decisions about cost and how are we cutting back on costs? How are we reassessing our budget because we don't know how long this is going to last? What does the 30, 60, 90 day look like? What adjustments do we need to make? All of that was loaded with dynamic decision making. And if you look back throughout the year, so we're sitting right now at the end of October, that has not stopped.
Nope.
And so even though there were those decisions, but if you think about it, doesn't it feel like every month new decisions needed to be made? And so, now it's about this loan. Now it's about that loan. Now it's about adapting to this. Now people are coming back to the workforce, but how do we adjust if somebody has COVID? Blah, 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 whatever, right? So dynamic decision making, if you use COVID as an example, it is a great petri dish and example of exactly what we're talking about. So I don't know if we dig into that a little bit more. Let's talk about what are the characteristics of dynamic decision making. What's involved? How do you do it well?
Yeah. So there is a, because of all the information that's out there, you really have to make some really good decisions, because the information that's out there is there's so much of it. There's so much information on the web. You can go find scholarly journal articles at Google. You can find news articles on COVID and why you shouldn't wear a mask. You can find news articles on COVID and why you should wear a mask. There's so much information out there, not just on COVID, but on any other topic, and especially within your industry. And so there's all kinds of, because of the sheer mass of information available. One of the things we have to realize is we just can't know it all. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we have to be able to make these dynamic adjustments, these changes, these adjustments with less information, even though there's more information out there, because we've got to be discerning about what facts we use. We have to consider the source. We have to do. It's almost like you have to do the research on the people on the people who are writing about the topic that you're researching. Which, say that 3 times fast. There is just so much information out there, and things are happening so quickly that we're not going to have all the information that we need or want, or maybe even feel comfortable with in making those decisions. And so in so many ways, it kind of goes back to, we almost have to trust our gut as much as anything. We were talking before the podcast, as we were kind of talking about this one. And we've mentioned in a previous podcast, but I think it was Colin Powell who talked about, you're going to have to make decisions in the military. They look at making decisions on 40 to 70% of the information that they have, that they're never going to have all the information that they want or need. They have a limited amount. 40% is about how much you need. And if you hit 70%, then you probably got as much as you'll ever get. And so they need people who can think dynamically and think quickly and think in ways that allow them to use their experience, their training, to make adjustments, and then to make a decision and commit to it and go, and then still be ready to make an adjustment to that decision. That so many of the decisions that we have to make now in this world at this time are flexible. And we have to think of them, we have to be flexible, and we have to realize that they could be very short-term decisions, that things change, like you said, from month to month. And that's the culture we live in. So I think that's, again, that's a little bit of kind of the background of what it is. And in the past, you had a limited set of information. Before the internet, I just was thinking, before the internet, we didn't know what was going on really outside of maybe the major newspapers. The New York Times, the LA, Times, the Washington Post. Maybe you were able to get a copy of, foreign newspapers that were, at this point, a week or a month old. You think back to what people were doing in the 50s and the 60s. They had a limited set of resources and data points by which to make a decision. And now we've got so many data points. And that's what makes this so different than, 30 years ago. Even in some cases, let's see, the rise of the internet was late 90s. So you're looking at, 25 years ago. but that amount of information is just so much that you have to be discerning. You have to trust your gut more, and you have to really rely on your experience. You have to rely on your training, and so that's one of the reasons that that I think that people in their 50s and 60s make great entrepreneurs these days, because they have this experience to kind of go on, and because they've been around for so long, and they use their gut, they use the data, but they use their gut too, to make those decisions, and are able to do that without being kind of stuck in place. We can get analysis paralysis, because we try to analyze everything and overthink everything, and you just can't do that these days, because if you do that, you're going to find yourself that the decision should have been made 3 weeks ago, and things are way, you're too late now at that point.
You missed the boat.
You missed the boat. Absolutely. And that happens, right? I mean, we see that all the time. Somebody has a great idea, and they got stuck in the weeds, or they got stuck in the data, or stuck in the analysis, and somebody comes along and pulls off something really close to what they were thinking about. If they had just done it instead of sitting around thinking about it, then they could have been first to market, and first to market most of the time wins, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I just think it's hard that a lot of times when you spend so much time gathering information, which is very important, and it's just hard. It's the tension between gathering the information to make a good decision, but then knowing when to go ahead and pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when we wait too long, we really do miss the boat, and we miss the opportunity window. And so now things have changed. And because things are changing faster, what you just did all that research for and would have been the perfect move in September, I'm sorry, now we're in November and it's a completely different game.
Right.
So, if you had made the decision in September, you would be adapting it in October, October, right, November anyway. But if you haven't even made that decision, you just missed that step, because
Right.
now you have to start researching again, because the game has changed for November. So all of that energy is out the window, because that's not relevant anymore. There's a new.
It's exhausting, and it really is exhausting, and there comes a point where you just give up.
Well, and I think that is the difference between the 2.0 leadership and the 4.0 leadership. In 2.0 leadership, we had more time. Things moved a little bit slower. They were definitely more finite. And that's why, or finite, put the emphasis in the right place. They were more finite. But right now with 4.0 leadership, that is one of the big pivots or changes that we need in leadership, because if we don't adapt to this dynamic decision making, we do experience frustration, because by the time you figure it out, it changed. So now we feel frustrated. Right. Or by the time you figure it out, it changed. So now I feel discouraged. I feel that what's the point? Why am I doing all this work? We begin to question ourselves. We begin to feel that it is pointless. And then that can even spin into depression, or the lack of putting out a direction, because you're like, wow, things are changing so fast. We just need to wait for the dust to settle. Right. Well, guess what? The dust is not going to be settling. So you need to figure out how to operate while it's a little bit foggy, because if you wait for the dust to settle, you're going to go out of business, because it's not going to settle. Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting. I wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that you were saying. So you were talking about kind of the volume of information that's coming out, and the need for us to be discerning. And a couple of things. Number one is our sources. It Right. used to be that we could just Google, and it used to be 10 years ago, you could just Google. But now, and especially with in the United States, where we see our elections, whatever, there's just so much wrong and miss and jaded and biased information that, number one, as leaders, to really know your source. Who is the credible source? What is their bias? What is your bias? And so understanding our biases today is becoming very important, which is a thought we didn't really have to think about before, but we
Right.
have to add that to our filter of information. So our sources and our biases. And I think the other thing is it begins to tip to another change that's happening in our 4.0 leadership, which is you were talking about not being the expert.
Mm-hmm.
Agree with that completely. And if I'm not the expert, who is? Oh, okay. This is about talking to our team.
Right.
And this is talking to our customers. And this is talking to our vendors or whoever that circle of influence and ripples out from that is. Because really, where we're getting information is not just in our little secret search in our office, but our information is coming from talking to the feet on the ground,
Yep.
talking to people on every different level because they are the expert. They have eyes to see and understand things that we don't. So instead of in our 2 point way, where the head was supposed to come up with the information and trickle it down, now we come underneath this massive network of people who are working, and we're moving around to these different pods or groups of people to understand, what do they see? What do
Right.
they, what are they aware of? What do they think is changing? And so our information source becomes more dynamic to talk to our people as well.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, if you see yourself as someone who is always willing to learn, then you're going to ask a lot of questions of a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be around a lot of people, curious people with a high level of curiosity have a high level of network, have a larger network, and so they can ask from so many different perspectives, and once you kind of get this, once you there's a reason that they only survey about 1,500 people for a political poll, right? And the reason is because you get a broad enough demographic that you can filter out biases, and essentially you get a good understanding of who people are going to vote for instance. And that kind of is the way it works in kind of dynamic decision making and networking and making those decisions. If you have a broad enough range of in your network, a variety of sources, a variety of biases and experiences and those kinds of things, you don't have to go to 1,500 people. You can go to 20, and because you have the relationship that you have with them and the experience that you have with them and through life, you can filter that. I mean, you just almost intrinsically or unknowingly filter that and are able to kind of take everything that they say and find the answer within it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need your network, but it's not like you need 2,000 people. You need a small group, and then as you understand who they are and the information they're sharing, then you can usually find the system, you can find the process, you can find that nugget that can help you make those decisions in the future.
I think that ties into the other piece that you were talking about, which is this whole concept of making decisions before having all the information. And on some level, we have to be more comfortable with taking risk and failing forward. And that comes from being unattached to being right. It comes from being unattached to being seen as ego, looking good, the superior business owner, the superior leader, executive, whatever it is, that we are unattached to being right. And so we're willing to explore and to experiment, to try things out. And the good thing about the pace of things is that when things are moving so quick, I remember years ago at church, we would change something and people would get really upset if they didn't like it because they felt like it was going to be there for 50 years or something. And we're like, well, we're probably going to be changing that next month. And that was really frustrating to them because that wasn't the way they operated. But this industry 4.0, it's constant evolution and change. So we're not changing it because it was bad or because it wasn't working. If it was great, we're going to build on it. If it was bad, we're going to change it. If there was something that needed to be evolved from it, we're going to take it and evolve it. But things in general are not staying the same. They were the way it was years ago, where you would create it and it just stayed that way for a long
Right.
time. That's not the case anymore. So it gives us greater permission, or you can stop stressing about failing forward and about being unattached and about taking that risk, because it's going to change. You're going to have the opportunity to reassess. And it doesn't mean that the cheese is always moving. It's a evolution. It's a
Right.
series of developments that is really happening.
Yeah, and I think that's what the agility framework really tries to promote is you do things in short iterations, adjusting and tweaking along the way, as opposed to doing something and kind of setting it in stone for 6 months or a year or 10 years, which is usually tends to be what happens. You in some organizations, you make a change and it becomes a hill to die on. Um, you know, we have to remember that we're trying to stay in the game as opposed to winning the game. That part of so much of what we're trying to do is just to stay in the game and keep the game going. That's Senec's framework in the infinite game concept.
Right.
Uh, and so to do that, we've got to adjust to stay in the game. Um, you can look at all kinds of things. You can look at college football and see the adjustments that have been made in the past 10 years. And to the point that last week, the head coach at Alabama came out and said, essentially, defense doesn't win championships anymore. You've got to have a dynamic offense. Well, in Alabama lore, that's crazy. I mean, you lived and died with defense. And in other colleges, the same thing. But he realized the need to adapt, and their offense has been pretty dynamic probably the last 5 or 6 years. So we have to be agile in that frame, in that regard, and that's why. So we have to live with complexity. We have to live with things changing and be comfortable with that. And so we have to have this agile mindset that I'm going to take something, I'm going to tweak it, I'm going to tweak it, I'm going to tweak it. I may need to scrap it altogether after 6 months because it's just not going to work in this environment. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking about the infinite game as well, because I think not only is it if we focus on the finite, the things changing becomes really frustrating. So
Right.
there's that piece of it. And there's also, it does help to inform our focus. And if we're focusing on the infinite game, we're focusing on what is the larger purpose or objective that we're doing. Our purpose is not that thing that we just set up, that process that we just created, that team that we just created. That is not the greater purpose of what we're doing. That's just a step in the process of the infinite game.
Right.
Versus if we play a finite game, every step becomes winning or losing. And so when we get really attached to this finite winning or losing, like it was all about this team that just got set up and now it got blown out of the water. Okay, who cares? It doesn't matter, because our larger purpose is we're in business for the sake of XYZ. Right. And that's what we're really focused on. So if this team serves us for 1 month, great. If it serves us for 1 quarter, excellent. If it works all next year, fantastic. But if we need to evolve it or change it, it doesn't matter, because what we're really about is that infinite game.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's really good. And so this is why things are so different today than they were. The speed at which things change is so much greater than in the past. The sources and the resources are so much greater, and so you have to sift through things. So that's those things are part of why it's just it's just so different than it used to be, and it's going to be so much different in a year than it is today, because of the way things are changing and the speed at which things are changing. And I think we have to begin to think about how we're going to develop this process, or to develop this mindset. So let's talk about developing that mindset. How do you think we start that process, or start with how thinking about how to change our mindset to develop this dynamic thinking?
Yeah, that's great. I think first of all, that's the tough question.
Yep.
B, let's practice what we preach. To those people who are listening, put in the comments, what are you doing to develop a dynamic mind, dynamic decision making? How do you do that? Like, let's crowdsource. What do people see? Go ask your friends, and you go ask your people. How can we be making dynamic decisions? How can we be developing the skill of making decisions faster? So go ask your team, because they probably have ideas. It's interesting. I think even talking to the Gen Z people, a high schooler or a college student, they have different softwares and websites and things that they use to go get answers.
Right.
So go ask them. It's really interesting. So number one, I would say ask your team or your network, because other people have ideas. Instead of being like, oh, what's the secret answer? Let's brainstorm it, because it's evolving and growing. Another thing that I'm aware of is really about trying things new, which I'm not always super great at, honestly. I kind of like my routines and my rhythms. I feel like it's one of my benefits and flaws. There's a shadow and a strength of it. To me, from 2.0, it makes me fast. When I have processes and systems, when I have things automated, I'm fast, which is really great. I love that. But when change comes, I get really upset when it messes up my systems and my processes.
Yep.
And so it makes me less agile. It makes me less flexible, and it makes me less open to change. That's a problem. That's an example of 2.0 thinking that we have to figure out how to deal with, because we do still need to move quickly and efficiently, but we have to become more open. So exploring how to become more open, to me, is about trying things new, doing your routine in a different way. Shake it up on purpose and make sure that you don't get hijacked when change happens. Like, create change. I was listening to someone a while ago, and they were like, on a regular basis, they change what's in all the drawers on their dresser, in their dresser. So, you've got your socks, your underwear, whatever, you switch it. Now, what is the problem with that? Go do that. It's really frustrating at times, because you open the wrong drawer, because that's become a habitual short circuit. What are you doing? You're switching it on purpose to make yourself agile for change. So trying new things can be a really great way to just make yourself a bit more flexible. What thoughts do you have?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think we need to do is to be more random in our intellectual pursuits. So one of the things that you can do is create some randomizing rituals, and by that I mean used to use when you could go to the movie. One of the things that you could do is just go up and say, give me a ticket to the next movie playing, and that exposes you to things that you potentially would never have done on purpose. Do that in a bookstore with books or with magazines. Do that at if you're going to buy clothes, just instead of going to where you normally go, just pick another store at random. Obviously that you don't want to buy clothes in an ice cream shop, but you know what I mean. Pick a different store and go see what they have and go explore. And what that does is it opens you up to new experiences and new ideas, and it causes those things to churn in the background. And at some point, it could even be a way to a means to come up with new ideas, new products, new services, even. So sometimes I'll go into a Barnes and Noble or even in Walmart or a grocery store where you have magazine stands, and just go and pick up a magazine that you would have never dreamed of. Read, at least look through every page, read through it, scan it. It'd be amazing the kinds of things that you can pick up and ideas that would help develop this idea of thinking differently and being dynamic in your processes. So randomizing rituals is one. And then just in general, I think it's always good to read outside of your domain, to talk to people outside of your domain, so that you're not stuck simply in your domain. So if you're in the education industry, talk to people who are engineers, or talk to people who are hunters. Talk to people who work in artificial intelligence. There's some, just pick those. Just pick some random folks, or not random folks, but people in different industries. Talk with them, ask about what they do, get some details and be curious and learn. I think that opens your mind to a whole new way of thinking, and when that happens, you're expanding your ability to think critically, to think differently, and to think quickly. And it allows you to pull from resources you would have never pulled from before. So I think those are some things to do. And then I know churches who every year in their Sunday school classes, their small group classes, they would go in and move the walls 1/4 of an inch, just to help people understand that room was not theirs. It belonged to the larger body of people in the church, and so the point was to get them comfortable with change. And I think we've got to be at that point. I mean, we're not going to be dynamic in our changing if we're not comfortable, dynamic in our decision making if we're not working to be more comfortable with change. And so I think you have to create change moments in your life. Changing providers for something, changing the paint in your house. Do something like that once a year, once every 6 months, so that it doesn't become a blur and a habit. It becomes something that you're actively thinking about. And that's the problem I think we get caught in when we choose not to be dynamic in our decision making. We just let the lizard brain take over, and we don't think about things. And so it just runs on autopilot. So it's awareness, it's mindfulness to think about the things that need to change. I need to change that, and then go do it.
I want to dovetail on that with your mindfulness. I think that's good. On the mindset thing, I think there's two. Agree. I was also thinking about that with mindfulness, because I think number one, it is our mindset. We have to prepare our mind in order to take these actions, because these two things work together. So with our mindset, number one, there's kind of a mindset of unattachment. And if we are attached to the way we do things, if we're attached to something being right or wrong, we have judgments about the way something is done, it makes it more difficult for us to be okay with change.
Right.
When I was younger, we never painted the house, right? And it was white walls. So to paint the house, it would be a major violation of these are white walls, versus, right, like you said, we're changing the color, we move things around. Sure, some personalities are going to do better with this than others. And there's a lot, really, we know in the disc, I love that profile. The S profile makes up over 50% of the average personality profile, and they do not like change.
Yep.
This is very difficult for many people in their profile styles, because change is kind of anti the way they operate.
Right.
So number one is growing a spirit of unattachment.
Yep.
And like you've been saying, openness, withholding judgment of this being right or wrong. And then dovetailing on the mindfulness, really, I agree with what you're saying with the lizard brain. In order to be in this space to make dynamic decisions, we have to stay in our frontal lobe, because the frontal lobe is where our big picture thinking occurs. And
Right.
when we get hijacked and we're in that lizard brain, we're reacting. We've become emotionally, really, we're emotionally rebelling or emotionally responding to something, and we can't actually make those dynamic decisions because now it's clouded with emotion. So it's gotten extra foggy because we're creating fog with our emotions.
Right.
If we can practice mindfulness, we can stay down here on level 0, 1, 2, and we can be responsive to the changes and the things happening. And if we create our own change for ourselves to practice that, we'll keep ourselves down here rather than other people's change freaking us out, our own change freaking us out. You know, we're up here in the lizard brain, we're up in 8, 9, 10, and we've got to stay down here, which is hard. But mindfulness today is just, it's a big deal. I love Heart Math. I'm going to put that in the notes because I think it's a great organization. Have you done any research with them?
No.
They have a free program right now because of COVID. So I'll put the link in there. It's great. So Heart Math is an interesting organization, but it all plays on mindfulness. So anyway, talk to your team, try new things, randomize rituals, get your mindset in the right place, practice change are a couple things to start making yourself more agile.
Right. Absolutely.
Which allows you to make more dynamic decisions. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just that I was just agreeing with you. I think those are some of the great tasks, the great steps that we can do to begin to develop that decision-making process.
Cool, good. All right, well, we'd love to hear from you leaders, what you think are the skills needed in order to make dynamic decisions, what you're doing to help yourself be more agile in dynamic decision-making, what you see as changes that are moving the cheese and affecting things. We'd like to hear from you in the comments. And then next week, we're going to keep going on this topic and talk about more skills for 4.0 leadership.
Absolutely. Well, so thanks so much for listening to the Innovative Leader podcast with us. And so we look forward to bringing you some great content to help you equip, inspire, and transform how we lead in life and work. So if you have any questions, feel free to mention that in the comments, send us an email, go to our website, innovativeleader.co. Find the podcast anywhere you get your podcast, and then also on YouTube as well. So Christy, it was a great conversation. Thanks for the discussion, and we'll continue again next week.
Sounds good. Have a great week.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.